Senator Cameron.
Yes, I double-clicked it. Mr. President, under Rule 39, I'd like to disclose that I am an insurance agent, a health insurance agent. I make a good share of my living off of selling health insurance. Although this act will not benefit me personally, in fact, it will take, in my opinion, take away income from my livelihood, give my wife less money to spend. I do need to make that declaration.
Shall be recorded, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I was given a lot of thought to what I wanted to say this morning. It is still this morning. And I've given a lot of thought to what I could say and the respectful kind of way. I want to do three things with you this morning. First, I'd like to talk to you about the impacts that this bill or a federal exchange has upon me and upon those in my industry and upon me as a business person and other business individuals. I'd also like to talk a little bit about a different perspective from that of what you may have heard. And lastly, I want to tell you why I think you should support the bill. In so doing, I'll also try and address some of the questions that the good senator from 32 has just done, in my opinion, a marvelous job in answering them and marvelous debate. I hope that you all listened very carefully to his debate. I, like all of you, or most of you on this floor, remain opposed to the Affordable Care Act. I don't like the way it was passed. I don't like the provisions of it. I agree with the senator from 12 that it is poor public policy. I do not agree that it's constitutional. I disagree with the findings of the United States Supreme Court. And contrary to my very respected friend, Senator McKenzie from 13, I don't believe it's my prerogative to choose which provisions of law that I believe are constitutional or not. I don't believe it's my prerogative to determine whether or not I buy a driver's license. Some people say that's unconstitutional. Whether I pay my taxes, some people say that's unconstitutional. I don't believe that's my prerogative. I stood on this floor, I swore an oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the state of Idaho and the Constitution of the United States. And it's not what I determine or what I believe that Constitution to say, but what is the Constitution. I love, and he took off so I can talk about him. He saw me debate and stand up, so he left. Senator from 35 has great passion when he talks about wolves. I have a similar passion when it comes to talking about insurance. There's an analogy that said that when it comes to breakfast, a chicken is dedicated, a pig is fully committed. I am the pig in this case. I am the individual who is dedicated and will be victimized, if you will. That's kind of an outrageous term, but on the basis of a federal exchange and to some smaller degree on a state exchange. I'd like to give you a couple of examples and examples of how in my office things operate, and a couple of examples statewide. The state, have had the honor to be here a day or two. And the citizens of my district have saw fit to send me back, and I appreciate them, and I do my best to represent them and their wishes. And in that day or two, I've had the honor and privilege to chair the Healthcare Task Force. And that task force came into place several years ago when some of us decided health insurance premiums were out of control and decided that there were things that we could do as a state to submit our will, things that we could do better than any other state, ways that we can proceed to control costs. And I'm here to represent to you that we have been successful. We have one of the lowest costs in the nation. I'm told we have the lowest cost in the nation for small group products and either the second or lowest cost in the nation for individual products. That didn't happen by accident. That didn't happen out of circumstances. It happened by good leadership, good planning, and good decisions by this body. A few years ago, we adopted the High Risk Pool Act. People had concerns. You've heard about it being talked about as sort of a model for this act. It's a quasi-public entity. It assesses insurance companies. We are the model in the nation. Our act is copied. We help individuals who cannot qualify for health insurance by any other means obtain health insurance. The federal government came along in the Affordable Care Act and said, we want you to have a pre-existing condition high-risk pool. And it required that we would make some changes. And we said, no thanks. We're doing it better. We think we can do a better job. And so we're not going to do it. So they implemented their own federal high-risk pool, pre-existing condition pool. The way they enroll the individuals in Idaho is a call center, I think in Wichita, Kansas, contracted with a federal employees union. The Idaho citizens who want to participate in that pool get to call up and talk to somebody who's not licensed. They may be smart, but they're not licensed. They don't know Idaho law. They don't know any other provisions, but that's how they enroll. Some of the rest of you that do some business in the insurance arena know that a few years ago, the federal government passed the Medicare Part D Act. That's the prescription drug portion. Every year, from November to December, I have people come to my office. We help them go online, go to the exchange that's implemented by the federal government, and look at a plan and choose a plan that best suits them for either prescription drugs or Medicare Advantage plans or Medicare supplements. Do you know what I get paid for that? $0. I do that because I'm a community member and I want to help senior citizens. And so we have them, they come to our office, and we help them. I want you to think about how that might implicate if we were to go to a federal exchange. I certainly appreciate the opinions of those that are opposed to the exchange, and frankly, many of the concerns and issues that are raised have my heart. Many of them I can concur with, but they don't have my brain. I appreciate that some believe that there are other choices besides a state-based exchange or a federally based exchange. And it's pretty hard to get our minds around that that's really our only two choices, either a state-based exchange, an Idaho exchange, or a federal exchange, or a combination thereof. That's really our only choices. After the hearing, I was out in the hallway and I had a gentleman say to me, well, Dean, there's really another choice, a third choice. And I said, okay, what's that? He said, rebellion. That's not a choice. That's not a choice for us. I would love if we could tally up the countless hours of legal opinions and executives that have spent hours poring over the Affordable Care Act, trying to decide what to do. I guess one of the real tough parts for me, and I've heard one of the really hard to swallow criticisms, is that somehow the insurance industry doesn't know what they're talking about here. That somehow the agents don't know what they're talking about here. That's really hard to swallow. That's about like us saying, you know, we know best for how Micron should produce chips, or we know best for how the INEL should handle nuclear research. all of the insurance industry, all of the small business people that I talk to, all of the individuals, a number of them are saying, we want a state-based exchange. We trust the state better. We want to deal with the state. It's clear, it's evident that by refusing to act, we default to the federal government. They already have a leg up. They are already working on establishing a federally based exchange. They are already working on it for those states that choose to go that direction. They already have the Medicare Part D model that I just talked about. They already have that blueprint. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's all there for them. They are already making progress. If Idaho were to choose to default, well, I better not say what I was going to say. What the heck. If Idaho chooses to default, we will be but a pimple Okay, never mind. That's why I have good friends around me to help me stay out of trouble. Let's talk about, it's been alluded to, 26 other states. Let's talk about that for a minute. And you know, the good senator, who's my friend from 9, quoted some of the governors of those states. And I know it's hard to imagine that this issue would be politicized or that governors would try and make political statements. But sometimes their actions speak louder than words. A number of the states that are choosing not to participate are not choosing to go to the federal exchange, not for the altruistic, let's band together, let's go shoulder to shoulder and fight the federal government. That's not what they're doing. Some of them lend their words to that, but that's not what they're doing. Some of them, on the same time they're choosing to go to the federal exchange, are talking and working on Medicaid expansion. That's not exactly a coherent strategy, in my opinion. Some of them have chosen or are choosing to go to the federal exchange because of the poor decisions that they have made in the past. I don't know that I recall all of the states that the good senator from 9 brought up, but let me just point to a couple. Do you realize that Idaho, part of the reason that Idaho's rates are the lowest in the nation is because we have the least number of mandates? Most other states have 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x as many mandates as Idaho. Maine, the state that was brought up, they have 3x as many mandates as Idaho. I won't bore you with the list. Some of these mandates are important issues, frankly. I don't want to read them because somebody might get the bright ideas, think we need to pass a mandate on them. But, I mean, some of them are good things. And many of them are already covered under the policies that are available today. Oklahoma has 2.5 times more mandates. And the granddaddy, one of the granddaddies, Texas, they've got almost 3.5 times as many mandates as the state of Idaho. Some of the states that are choosing to go to a federal exchange are doing so because their pocketbook may be cheaper. It may affect their families less by doing a federal exchange than the state exchange. But that's not the case for Idaho. That's not the provision for us. That's not what we have to deal with. We have the lowest rates in the nation and the most at risk should we go to a federal exchange. Once in a while, somebody will say, well, all this thing is really about, and frankly, I agree with it to some degree, is that the federal government and the Obama administration want to take us to a single-payer system. And that is a fear, and I think a legitimate fear, and that this is somehow a slippery slope to that event. I want to tell you, in my opinion, passing a state-based exchange thwarts that from happening, and defaulting to the federal government doesn't. You do not weaken the federal government by defaulting to them. You do not weaken the federal government by abandoning the field of battle. The governor should be commended for trying to protect our rights and trying to keep us on the battlefield. You do not weaken the federal government by defaulting to them. You make them stronger. I was asked a couple of issues that come up, and I'm not going to go through all of them. The senator from 9 also mentioned the Real ID, and the good senator from 12 answered that very adequately. I just wanted to add, the Real ID Act isn't the president's legacy bill. The Affordable Care Act is. In fact, he doesn't even mind us calling it Obamacare. It is his legacy. And if you believe that he is going to back away from it, that's a mistake. It was alluded to, Mr. President, the quote that's often been said about states must act like states. And I've used that quote too, but I use it on the other way. I think this is acting like states. I think passing this bill says that we are the state. This is our exchange. This is the rules by which we will play with. Justice Roberts also said, if I might read from that same opinion, we possess neither...
Senator?
Thank you.
Which opinion?
From the Supreme Court decision on the Affordable Care Act.
Senator may read.
On page 6 of that opinion, Mr. President. We possess neither the expertise nor prerogative to make policy judgments. These decisions are entrusted to our nation's leaders, who can be thrown out of office if they disagree with them. It is not our job to protect the people from the consequences of their political choices. My friend from 23, who is also now left, but not before he called and talked to me about it. The question was asked about spending authority. What's different? What's different between 2 years ago when the Department of Insurance had a bill and there was $2.5 million in that bill? Spending authority is given to a state agency. Spending authority is given to a state agency who seeks to spend taxpayer dollars. The exchange is not a state agency. We don't give spending authority to the high-risk pool. We don't give spending authority to the Idaho Housing Association. We don't give spending authority to the State Insurance Fund. We don't give spending authority to the Health Care Authority. And now we won't with the exchange. Some have asked and questioned about whether there'd be penalties or assessments. Let me tell you how the high-risk pool works. The high-risk pool has a system by which they assess the carriers after expenses have been incurred. The immunization program has a system by which we assess the carriers after the expenses have occurred. At times, even the immunization pool will issue an assessment to the carriers to front-end the costs. If in the event that there is leftover money from the assessment, it would just be adjusted in the following year's assessment. There's not going to be excess money, and there is every impetus and every indication why the board members of this body would want to control those costs and keep them low because it's their own pocketbook that's paying for them. Sometimes I think that we get confused as to what the exchange really is. It's not a regulatory body. That's left to the Department of Insurance in Idaho, and it's left to the federal government. It's not an enforcement body. That's left to others. Most likely any enforcement, the good senator from 3 asked, where's the enforcement going to come from? Most likely any enforcement is coming from the IRS. I think that's the reason for the way that the Supreme Court ruling was taking place. There's no violation. I don't know what a violation would be. It's a completely voluntary entity. If I want to go to the exchange, I can. If I don't want to, I don't have to. I'm not going to be penalized. The exchange doesn't collect penalties or assess them. The exchange doesn't determine whether somebody violated or not. The only potential violation that I could even imagine, one of the jobs of the exchange is to make sure that carriers are truthful and open in their communications on the exchange of the products for which they sell and how they pay claims. I suspect that if an exchange found that a carrier was not doing so appropriately, they still don't have any authority to do anything to them, except to call the Department of Insurance up and say, hey, you might want to go look at XYZ insurance company. I'm not sure that they're doing things quite appropriately. The exchange is nothing more than a website. It's not the agent of the federal government. That in my opinion, that is not a factual statement. It will not be implementing or enforcing the Affordable Care Act. Mr. President, let me just, there's other things I want to say, but let me just shift. Let me just shift to why I think you should support this act. Number one, it protects Idaho citizens. It protects Idaho citizens from an unwilling, overreaching federal government. It protects Idaho citizens. Number two, it defends our 10th Amendment rights, and I believe the governor is correct, and I believe that we should be supporting him in trying every effort to defend our 10th Amendment rights. If at the end of the day we're unsuccessful, the only thing we've lost is being unsuccessful. We can then go the other direction. If, however, we decide to default to the federal government, we can never regain that lost ground. Number three, with an Idaho exchange, Idaho retains control. Idaho retains control of its regulatory markets. If we default to a federal exchange, we lose the ability for the state to regulate the small group and individual marketplace. That means when your constituents have complaints about how XYZ insurance company handled a claim or about what they're charging them, you have to file those complaints with a federal bureaucrat. You would not file them with the Department of Insurance if you default to a federal exchange. It will cost less. I know it's difficult to get our arms around what it's going to cost. Frankly, we don't know how many people are going to participate. The one bid said $4 to $7, $4 being the low end if we have a lot of people participating. We may not have a lot of people participating. Maybe closer to the $7 fee. Good Senator from 32 indicated what Nevada's doing. That may be closer to what the actual cost may be. But in either case, it is cheaper than the federal exchange. The federal government has already tipped their hand. They've said they're going to charge 3.5% of premium. That is significantly more expensive just to administer. They will administer the plan under their own whims without Idaho residents or Idaho consumers being on a board or Idaho carriers being on the board. It'll be under their own whims whether even Idaho carriers get to participate in the federal exchange. The federal law calls for one non-for-profit company and one for-profit company. HHS has said since then, yeah, we'll probably allow other carriers to play, but we don't know under what rules, and we don't know under what mandates. It is a fallacy for us to think under a federal exchange that some nationwide company will come into Idaho and offer a specific plan based on Idaho mandates. They're not going to do that. They're going to come in based on the mandates that they have from other states, which include a lot of egregious choices. And some I won't go into saying with you, but I know that you would be appalled at. Number 6, it will cost Idaho businesses and Idahoans less to participate under a state exchange versus a federal exchange. Let me talk about a little bit how a state exchange might work for a small business person. A small business person can say, who has maybe not been providing health insurance in the past, they might be able to say, look, I can afford $350 or $400 a month for my employees. So employees, you go to the exchange and pick the product that best suits you. That's called choice. I don't know why we'd be against that. That allows the consumer, the employee, to choose the plan that best suits him. Sure, there may be plans that aren't as quite like we might like, but they might be an HSA plan, or they might be another plan. One employee might choose a high deductible HSA plan, another one may choose a plan that has full benefits and prescription drug coverage. That would be theirs. But the benefit to the employer is that those costs are then capped. He can then control his costs. There is no doubt in my mind, no doubt in the insurance industry's mind, that it will cost Idaho consumers less under an Idaho exchange versus a federal exchange. This goes back to my point a few minutes ago. The carriers, the insurance industry, consumers, small businesses are asking for you to pass this act. They're asking for that ability. The carriers are asking not because they will profit from it, because they won't, not because they get some advantage, because they won't, but because they're trying to survive. They're trying to stay alive and stay in Idaho and keep Idahoans employed at their place of businesses. Under a federal exchange, they'll use navigators. There will not be the need for agents. They might allow us agents to participate at my 0 commission rate. The good senator from 32 mentioned that Idahoans support this, and he mentioned a poll. I can tell you there were other polls done at the time of the election, and there are other polls done nationwide. All of them show between 68 to 75% of Idahoans, 70% of Idahoans, etc., want a state-based exchange over a federal exchange. Some nationwide polls even show 4-to-1 conservatives want a state-based exchange over a federal exchange. Mr. President and Senators, the Idaho Health Insurance Alliance has distributed lots of materials to you. They've done a great job. I know some will say, well, I'm only hearing from insurance agents, insurance carriers. Take a look at the list of some 444 groups and individuals. People like the Idaho milk producers and Idaho realtors and the Idaho retailers, who their vested interest is to have the least affordable health care as possible, with Idahoans being in control of those decisions. Mr. President, I appreciate the attention and the time you've given me this morning. I would urge your support of Senate Bill 1042.